Now it's time for your eye in the sky for the next 6 weeks' weather. Brought to you by Hawkeye Pro from Ravenstown, where the proof is in the paddock.
Yes, we do have Tony on the line sitting there. Normally we just talk to him once a week, but this week with the cyclone popping up, we figured this close to the event we needed to get the latest info. Tony, g'day mate. Welcome to the show again. Thank you.
Hi there, Andy. Good to be back.
Nice to have you. Nice to have you. Now, Tony, what is the latest? We've seen red warnings popping up through the North Island, which was very much to be expected. Give us your take on, and I asked Mark Mitchell, the Emergency Management Minister, earlier on in the show whether we were looking potentially at something akin to Gabrielle in 2022. What's your read on that? This is Category 2, I understand.
Yeah, the system has definitely got quite a lot of energy still tucked in it. And normally cyclones, as they approach New Zealand, lose their intensity quite rapidly. And what ends up around New Zealand is often a little bit of a pale imitation of what has occurred in the tropics. This time round, that's not quite the case. This system is retaining its structure and its energy and its characteristics much further south than most ex-cyclone type systems normally do. So that's one of the reasons for the concern, I think. The other is that we know that this system will probably impact the northern half of the North Island. It's pretty clear from the track maps that we've got. Whilst you can't predict exactly where it will go to the nearest kilometre, we can say that there's a very high probability that it's going to make landfall, impact the northern and northeastern parts of the North Island, travel across the central North Island, move out to the east or southeast of the North Island, probably somewhere over the Hawke's Bay or Wairarapa sort of area, and then away out into the Pacific there. So it's also a direct hit on New Zealand, which is another of the reasons for concern. And I think this system is going to redefine how people perceive cyclones and how they affect New Zealand. We're used to thinking of cyclones as being something that sits around for several days and gives us a flood that develops over a period of 24, 48 hours. This system is moving through very, very rapidly. The weather associated with this will come and go inside 12 hours probably, which means that you haven't got so much of those long-lasting effects, but you've got very short, sharp effects. So you need to be looking for things like flash flooding, rather than flooding that develops over a longer period of time. You've got to be looking for briefer periods of gale to severe gale winds. They might only be strong for an hour or two, but the intensity in that hour or in that 2-hour period could be really quite extreme. So I think these are the sorts of things we need to be thinking about.
So, when can we expect a peak? Tony, you say it's going to be quite hard and fast storm. Can we expect to see a narrow window within that 12 or so hours that you say of can we expect a maximum intensity, I suppose, of that storm?
The impacts are going to be felt in Northland and Auckland and Coromandel and the Bay of Plenty on Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening. By early Sunday morning, that effect is going to be spreading to places like Gisborne, the central North Island. By the time we get to Sunday morning and the centre, the eye, if you like, of that cyclone is moving onto the land, then the effects are going to spread further south into places like Hawke's Bay. Taranaki will see some strong winds. Rain will start to spread into parts of the South Island later on Sunday as well. As the system moves away, so those effects ease from the north downwards, but we also have the potential for some heavy rain in places like coastal Marlborough and strong winds through Cook Strait. So those things will follow through perhaps on Sunday night or early on Monday morning. So it's a gradual progression as this system works its way down the island. Most of the South Island will probably miss out from this, which is a good thing. As I say, there is some potential for Marlborough, coastal parts of Marlborough, Kaikoura Coast, Marlborough Sounds, maybe even parts of Banks Peninsula as well to get some rain and some wind from this system, but most of the South Island will miss.
Tony, what sort of intensities can we expect in the peak areas? You talked about wind gusts for an hour. What sort of wind gusts are we going to get? and rain intensities? What can people expect if they're in the path for the direct hit?
Absolutely. Well, as I said, I don't think you're going to see a prolonged period of steady rain that accumulates to a large number over a long period of time. Rather, you're going to see a relatively short period of quite high intensity rain. So that's why I think it's useful to think of it in terms of phrases like flash flooding. Okay, so this is not likely to be the type of flooding where water levels rise gradually over 12 hours and consume large areas of your farm. It's much more likely that a stream is going to come up quite suddenly over the space of 1 or 2 or 3 hours and burst its banks. That's that type of flooding event that most people are going to see, I think. In terms of winds, there are going to be periods of gales. There may be winds that are severe gale force, and it may be that some parts of the country, of the North Island that are in the direct line of this system, get 2 periods of gales or severe gales out of this. One from, say, an easterly direction as the system arrives on Saturday night or early into Sunday morning, and then again from a southwest or westerly direction as it leaves later on Sunday. So there may actually be 2 periods of severe weather that some areas will experience. So don't just assume that because you get a period of strong winds and it's eased off, that it's not going to come back in again a little while later.
Can you give us some insight into why you expect this to be a little bit different to previous cyclones to New Zealand and why it will hold on to its strength for so long?
Yeah, sure. And the simple answer to that is it's moving very rapidly. It's moving much faster than most similar systems in the past have done. So you look at all the named cyclones of the last 10 years, they've generally tended to move quite slowly once they get around the New Zealand coast. This system is through and gone inside a little more than 24 hours. And that's quite unusual, quite rare. What it means is you don't get those prolonged periods of rain, but it does mean that the wind field gets compressed ahead of the system, and that can make the wind speeds stronger than you might get from a lazier, slower moving sort of system. So I think it's the speed of this system that's the factor. If you think about a good analogy is like if you've got a spinning top or something like that and you threw it in a river, the top keeps spinning around at its own pace, but where that top gets taken depends on the flow in the river. And that's where the what's happening in the rest of the atmosphere steers this cyclone system. And at the moment, the river is flowing quite fast, high up in the atmosphere. And that's going to push this cyclonic system through quite fast.
Tony, what about waves, storm surge? I've heard about that.
Yeah.
It is coming direct in, across the middle of the North Island, but what are we expecting coastally?
Absolutely. Coastal erosion and coastal inundation from storm waves is certainly going to be an issue with this storm. Particularly, I would suggest in that northeastern coasts of the North Island. So anywhere from Northland through Coromandel through the Bay of Plenty towards Gisborne. Ahead of this system, there could be some quite substantial waves built up. And then when the system churns away to the east in the Pacific on Monday and Tuesday, that is going to direct significant swell waves back onto the east coast of both islands later on next week. So that's going to be a factor as well. The weather will have long since disappeared by then, but there could be some quite big swells on eastern coasts for a few days too. So yes, watch out for coastal erosion. Watch out for strong or gale, severe gale, maybe even storm force winds in some of those really exposed coastal areas. Those places, if you live in a place where you're on a farm and you know that the wind is particularly enhanced in certain places on your farm or around certain hills and ranges in the region where you live, those are the places that are most likely to get affected this time round. For example, we may well see some gales in the southern part of the North Island later on Sunday night or early on Monday morning as the system leaves. So it's not all about what happens ahead of the system. Sometimes it's what happens behind the system as it departs as well.
Yeah, obviously, it's a significant event, and as you said, it is unusual. A lot of times these cyclones, once they hit land, they do sort of dissipate and peter out. This one's not, and it is a direct hit. Quite often they're just off the coast, right, and they get a bit lopsided. But yeah, it is different. This is, and as I think as Mark Mitchell said, there is threats to life in this, especially with fast flooding water and people getting caught. So that flash flooding is probably and storm surges, I think, quite potentially some quite big issues here, Tony?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you need to take the warnings seriously. You do need to stay up with Met Services warnings and the warnings that Civil Defence put out because, there is definitely a risk to safety from the system. Now, we shouldn't get too carried away. That doesn't mean that the whole North Island is in peril, in danger from this system. There will be large areas where there will simply be a period of heavy rain and strong winds, and it moves on, and people will go, oh, well, that wasn't too bad. But the difficulty is trying to pinpoint those areas where that won't be the case, where the rain will be heavy, will cause slips, will cause flooding, where the winds will be strong enough to blow things apart or blow them over, because there will definitely be some places where that happens too. And you don't want to be if you happen to be in those places, you don't want to be caught unprepared for that. So I think, my advice would be make sure you've got your farm organised to be able to take burst rivers. Make sure your stock are in a place where you know where they are and you can get to them quickly and easily if you have to. Make sure you've got simple supplies around that you'll need if trees come down, like chainsaws, fuel for chainsaws, sharpener for the chains. All of these sorts of things, very simple things you can put in place between now and Saturday night, but which could prove to be vital to have on hand in an instant should you need them on Sunday.
Great advice, Tony. Really appreciate your time on Countrywide Connect, mate. We'll talk to you again early next week. Hopefully the worst will have passed and you can find us a nice fine week, eh?
Yeah, that's the goal, definitely. A finer week next week with less violent weather in it.
How can people keep up with your forecast, Tony?
The 6-week and seasonal outlooks are live now on my Substack portal, so you can check the Blue Skies website. That's blueskies.co.nz, and you can join up to the subscription service there. You can subscribe for free and see the summary part, or you can pay the full subscription and see all the detail. There's 13 regions in New Zealand where we cover the weather coming up in the next 6 weeks, and that's updated weekly. And next week, maybe even in time for our next chat, Andy, on Tuesday, I'll have the seasonal forecast updated, so we'll be able to talk about what's going to happen between the months of May and July.
Okay, mate. Thanks very much. Right. That is weather from Tony.
Next Gen Tech. Backed by 40 years of soil science, Hawkeye Pro delivers insights every 10 meters to lift your farm's efficiency and sustainability and profitability. If you want more proof in the paddock, visit hawkeye.farm today.